So 6 years has passed since I last posted a video to this channel, but that doesn't mean that my life stood still. Of course, I read a lot of books, had 3 kids, and the beard is turning grey. But I thought it might be interesting, with the benefit of hindsight, to look back on those 6 years and see what books I read that actually affected my behavior and changed it for something better, and that these effects are still in place today. For me, that amounts to 4 books. I can pinpoint that they started a phase in my life that led to many other books and a lot of other research, but certainly was the catalyst for change. So the first book on my list is Early Retirement Extreme. It was written by Jacob Fischer, who is an astrophysicist, I believe, from Denmark. And he came up with the idea. He's probably not the first one, obviously, but he started to save 50% of what he was earning. And then he invested the rest of it. And he wasn't making a lot of money at the time. So that's where the extreme comes from. Because if you don't make that much money, you would have to be pretty extreme to save up a lot of money. And you would need some pile of cash to invest before it really starts to matter, even with compound interest. So he was saving up 50% and eventually moved to America. And he was so extreme that he also made his own soap, and he had no kids. He also had a wife, but she was not financially independent. But the whole goal of his saving was to become financially independent so that he wouldn't have to work, or at least just work with whatever it was that he wanted to do. And he started a blog, and the name of that was also named Early Retirement Extreme. And he also wrote a book, and you might have guessed the name, Early Retirement Extreme, and it's on Amazon. It's an ebook, and you can download it from there. I think he self-published that. But he was what many consider as the founding father of what today is known as FIRE, which I can't remember the acronym, what it actually stands for. And after him, I think some guy called Mr. Money Mustache took over with a more modern blog, and he was also probably more relatable as he had a kid and seemed more mainstream. But where I was going with this is that I read the book, and I'll put up some slides with the usual idea of, instead of paying your money that you earn to creditors, you pay it into the assets, and in that way you're paying yourself, and your assets will generate cash that will pay for your expenses. So eventually you'll have enough assets that you can retire, and you will live off whatever it is that you have for assets. Might be a stock portfolio where you live off 4% of the dividends or returns, so that you don't eat into too much of your cash pile of assets. And I read this, and it fascinated me a lot at the time. And the reason for this, I think, is that if you look at FIRE, it provides you with a really big carrot. It says, okay, so if you do this, then you can stop working, or at least just do whatever you want. And that is a big payoff, right? So it provides you with that carrot. And what Nietzsche says, I think it was Nietzsche, he says that you can endure anyhow if your why is strong enough. And that's why I think this book was pretty powerful, because at the time it was not mainstream with the early retirement or financial independence. So it affected me a lot, and it sent me down the rabbit hole. And the rabbit hole consists of, at first, bringing down your spending. So I did downsize my luxury car, and I did sell some stuff and cut a lot of spending. And I did build up a cash pile, and then you end up where you need to educate yourself on investing. And that's the biggest part of this rabbit hole, really, is the investing part. You could get lost there for the rest of your life, but you could also just invest in the S&P 500 or something like that, a dollar cost average into that. But for me, I went completely into the investing part and lost myself in that. But if you want to go into investing, I'm not going to deal with that here. I'm just going to recommend this book by Jacob Fischer. So I was pretty extreme with this, actually, for maybe 3 years, and it colored a lot of my decisions when I was buying stuff and things like that. So I did build up a pretty sizable cash pile and invested, and I had a good run with the bull market, so it was pretty timely. And actually right now would be pretty timely for you to do the same if you've never done it, because last year was the worst year in stocks since 2008, so you might do the same as I did. And that was the first book. And I think this was right about the time when I stopped posting YouTube videos, and I just read a lot of books instead on investing. And the second book on my list is the China Study. And the China Study is one of the first really scientific books on plant-based diet. It has later become pretty mainstream, I'd say. But if you go back to this book, it was a really comprehensive study conducted in China with a lot of participants from the populace there. And I think it was a collaboration between universities in China and in America. And what they found, of course, was that a lot of the diseases could be completely avoided if you steered clear of animal protein and pretty much stuck to eating plant-based foods, which today a lot of modern, more current science backs up completely. And I actually made an experiment here. When I read this book, I became completely motivated and I went completely plant-based. I ate only plant-based food for 8 months and I lost 10 kilo. Unfortunately, I also lost a lot of muscle mass and my gym performance really suffered. So eventually I sort of reverted back to also eating a more normal diet, but still predominantly plant-based. And that's what happens when you go completely extreme with something in a period of time. Even though you revert back to the mean, your baseline is still higher. So you have a new baseline, and your new baseline in this case is more broccoli. And in the investing case, it's, you will look at not financing a car, you'll buy it cash. You will make sure that you don't touch your snowball of assets. Eventually you will start revert again, and once again you might buy some luxury items and so forth. And the third book is David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, and I read this during the Corona lockdown where I couldn't go to the gym. It is by this guy named David Goggins. He's very interesting because he's basically an endurance athlete now, but he used to be quite fat and not in shape and not really like cardio very much. And he went from that to applying to the Navy SEALs, getting in and getting through all of that, and then in the end coming out and doing a lot of ultra marathons and some really crazy endurance stuff. And one of the key takeaways from the book is that, when you think you're tired and done, you spent maybe 40% of what you can actually do, and you have 60% left. So just keep running. It'll hurt, but you can keep running. And I've never really been into cardio at all, but I had to find some other way to stay fit during the lockdown for Corona. So I started running, and this book motivated me a lot, and I actually ended up running just one half marathon in minus degrees Celsius. And that was pretty tough for me. I realized that's not something special at all, but for me that was pretty tough, and I've never ran that far ever before. So I can really recommend this book. And I will also say that before I read this book and did this, I never had any cardio in my training. I only would work out with weights. But after this, I've always had maybe 20 minutes of cardio in every session, and a lot of the times I'll run on off days. So cardio has become a mainstay in my exercise program, and it will probably be there for as long as I can keep doing it. I also bought an exercise bike that I placed where I always see it when I walk past, when I go from the kitchen into the living room and so forth. So I always get a bad conscience if I haven't done any exercising that day at all. And you should eventually end up on that bike. I would also recommend that you not buy the book, but listen to the audiobook on Audible, because that one is much better, because he sort of came up with his own format for audiobooks where he discusses each chapter after he's done with it, and that is well worth listening to. And I would also recommend listening to it while you're on an exercise bike or something like that. It's for me at least, it was a lot more motivating than listening to music. And the fourth book on my list is Nicomachean Ethics, and this is a book by Aristotle. It was not really a book, it was his class notes, I think. He was teaching a class and he had some notes, and and it was turned into a book. I think, if I remember correctly, that Nicomachean was his son, so it doesn't really mean anything in the title. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But the key takeaway from this is that in human traits, and this is basically what the whole book is about, in human traits, the golden mean is usually the best or most preferable, because if you have too much courage, then you are foolhardy, and if you have too little courage, then you're a coward. Or if you spend too much money, then you're a spendthrift. If you spend too little money, then you are Mr. Scrooge. So in the way that he presents this golden mean, it also becomes a little bit of a defense for not being completely extreme yourself. So for me, I like a balanced life. I don't feel like I need to go to the moon or run an ultra marathon or anything like that. But I can appreciate that it's done, and I realize that it's necessary that some people are extreme with some things to move the human race forward, like going to the moon or, I don't know, discovering America for the first time and so forth. But it doesn't have to be me. I'm perfectly happy in the golden mean. I'm also happy that I, for short amounts of time, actually was fairly extreme with some of these things, because it moved my baseline further in that direction. So when I finally revert back towards my usual ways, they are somewhat improved. It's like a little seed of an idea had taken hold in my brain, and it starts coloring everything that I do after that, even though I might not put it on a pedestal and say this is the most important value for me and everything else must be valued below it. So the golden mean becomes sort of a defense for a more balanced lifestyle, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Thanks for listening, and let me know in the comments what books had a great effect on you. I'll catch you all next time.